Most people think they follow truth. They don't. They follow signals that feel like truth because they are tied to power, status, and survival. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago, and most modern people still haven't caught up. The uncomfortable reality is simple. Truth is rarely what moves crowds. Power does. Confidence does. Position does. The human brain is not built to reward accuracy. It is built to reward safety, belonging, and dominance hierarchies. That means what people say they value and what they actually respond to are often completely different things. You can be correct and ignored. You can be wrong and followed. And that gap is where most people fail without ever understanding why. Look around. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most accurate. The most followed person is rarely the most insightful. The most convincing argument is rarely the most truthful one. Instead, people unconsciously scan for signals. Who is speaking with authority? Who is socially validated? Who seems to have leverage? Who others are already reacting to? Once those signals align, truth becomes almost irrelevant. People will defend an idea not because it is correct, but because rejecting it would mean rejecting the group, the hierarchy, or the perceived winner. Machiavelli didn't dress this up in comforting language. He stripped it down. Power shapes perception. Perception becomes reality. And reality is only respected when it is backed by force, fear, admiration, or dependency. That is the part people resist because it removes the fantasy that fairness and logic naturally win. They don't. Think about how opinions actually form. A person rarely arrives at a belief through pure reasoning. They arrive through exposure, repetition, emotional framing, and social reinforcement. Once a belief is tied to identity or status, logic stops being a tool and becomes a threat. At that point, truth doesn't correct them. It provokes them. They don't ask, "Is this correct?" They ask, "Who is saying this, and what does believing it cost me socially?" This is why weak communicators think being right is enough. It isn't even close. If your message lacks power signals, confidence, clarity, social proof, emotional intensity, it gets filtered out before it is even considered. Not rejected, not debated, simply ignored. That is far more brutal. Power signals come in many forms. Sometimes it is status, titles, followers, money, influence. Sometimes it is emotional control. The person who doesn't hesitate, doesn't over-explain, doesn't seek approval. Sometimes it is group validation. If others are already nodding, the mind assumes safety and agreement. Even silence can be a power signal when it implies certainty rather than confusion. Now here is the part most people refuse to accept. Truth alone has no natural authority in human systems. It only gains authority when it is attached to power. That is why institutions, media, and leaders matter so much. They don't just spread information, they attach weight to it. The same sentence can be dismissed if it comes from a nobody, and accepted instantly if it comes from someone perceived as dominant or credible. This is not a moral statement. It is a structural one. And resisting it doesn't make you enlightened. It makes you ineffective. Machiavelli's insight was not that people are evil. It is that people are predictable. They are drawn to stability, certainty, and dominance cues. They fear ambiguity. They avoid cognitive and social risk. That means whoever appears most stable and least threatened by contradiction will often win perception battles, regardless of depth or truth. This is why debates rarely change minds. A debate is not a truth-seeking mechanism in practice. It is a performance of confidence under social observation. The audience is not evaluating logic in isolation. They are evaluating which participant looks more composed, more respected, more safe to align with. Once you understand that, You stop treating arguments like mathematics and start seeing them as positioning battles. Even in personal life, this plays out constantly. The person who hesitates is seen as weaker, even if they are right. The person who speaks decisively is often assumed correct, even if they are wrong. The brain mistakes certainty for competence. That error is not rare. It is the default setting. And here is where things become sharper. If humans follow power signals more than truth, then influence is not about being right. It is about being recognized as someone worth believing. That recognition does not come from intelligence alone. It comes from consistency, reputation, emotional control, and the ability to project certainty without begging for validation. Most people sabotage themselves here. They over-explain. They soften statements. They try to be universally liked. They assume humility alone will protect them. In reality, it often strips their message of force. A diluted signal is treated as noise, and noise gets ignored. Machiavelli would say this plainly. If you cannot shape perception, your truth has no army behind it. And without an army, truth is just an opinion waiting to be replaced by a stronger one. This is why systems reward those who understand perception management. Not because those individuals are always the smartest, but because they understand how attention and belief actually operate. They understand that humans don't first evaluate content, they evaluate context. Who is speaking? What is their status? What do others think? What emotional state is being triggered? Once you see this clearly, you stop being naive about communication. You stop assuming that correctness is enough. You start understanding that every message is competing in a battlefield of attention, trust, and perceived dominance. But there is a danger here. People hearing this often misunderstand it as, truth doesn't matter. That is wrong. Truth matters deeply, but only after it has been accepted. And acceptance is governed by power signals first. This sequence is critical. You do not lead with truth in a vacuum. You lead with credibility, structure, and perceived authority that makes truth acceptable. Without that, even the most accurate idea dies quietly. So Machiavelli wasn't encouraging deception. He was describing reality without apology. Humans are not rational truth machines. They are social survival systems wrapped in emotion and bias, constantly scanning for cues about who to trust, who to follow, and what aligns with their position in the hierarchy. Once you understand this, you stop being surprised by human behavior. You stop expecting fairness from perception. You stop assuming logic wins on its own, and you start seeing the real mechanism underneath. Power shapes attention. Attention shapes belief, and belief eventually gets mistaken for truth.